Hi, hello, and welcome to Cinema Express. My name is Ram Venkatsrika. In this episode of Films That Made Me, we have filmmaker Madhumita. Vanakkam Madhumita.
Hi, எப்படி இருக்கீங்க?
சூப்பராக இருக்கேன். நீங்கள் எப்படி இருக்கீங்க?
நல்லா இருக்கேங்க.
லவ்லி. ஸோ நீங்கள் எனக்கு ஒரு லிஸ்ட் கொடுத்துருந்தீங்க, லிஸ்ட் ஆஃப் 5 ஃபில்ம்ஸ். இந்த செக்மெண்ட்டில் நம்ம டிஸ்கஸ் போகிறதுக்கு என்ன ஃபில்ம்ஸ் உங்களை இன்ஃப்ளூயன்ஸ் பண்ணியிருக்கு என்று நீங்களே சொல்லிடுங்க இந்த 5 ஃபில்ம்ஸ்னு.
Okay, so the very first film is of course Children of Heaven. I've always aspired watching his films, and it's an Iranian film, and அதில் இருக்கிற அந்த ஒரு simplicity is what I love about it. So that's always my first favorite most film of all times. அதுக்கப்புறம் வந்து அரங்கேற்றம், கேபி சரோட அரங்கேற்றம், and then Parasite director wrote another film that a lot of people don't know about. It's called The Host. And then recently I watched the latest watch is Unforgivable. It was a film by Sandra Bullock. And then of course another all-time favorite is Maunaragam, Mani Saroda Maunaragam. So these are the 5 films. Unforgivable also because it's the latest watch. And, I keep watching a lot of content. So latest watch has been Unforgivable.
ஸோ குரோனாலஜிக்கலாக வரலாம் உங்கள் லைஃப்லேருந்து. இந்த படங்களில் ஆப்வியஸ்லி அன்ஃபர்கேபிள் வந்து போன வருஷம் தான் வந்த படம். ஸோ போன வருஷம் தான் பார்த்துருப்பீங்க. மீதி 4 படங்களில் எது ஃபஸ்ட்டு பார்த்த ஞாபகம் உங்களுக்கு?
கண்டிப்பாக மௌனராகம். ஏன்னா வந்து நான் வளர்ந்தது வெளிநாட்டில்னா கூட ஐ திங்க் Indian filmோட influence வந்து was always there. I grew up in Indonesia, and அங்கே வந்து we didn't get Tamil films theaterல வராது. I'm talking about 90s, and அங்கே Tamil film theaterல வராது. So we used to fly down to Singapore for weekends just so we could watch movies. And theaterல சிங்கப்பூரில் ஓடும். So we used to go and watch movies there, and திரும்பி வரும்போது VHS வந்து வண்டியாக எடுத்துகிட்டு வருவோம் suitcase-la. And that VHS was the only way for us to connect to India. Cinema was the only way for us to connect to India. Appo naanga 90s-la pona podu there was not too many Indians living there. So movies were our only connect to India. So andha vagayila Maunaragam, I've seen a lot of 50s 60s black and white films ellame paathirken, but ipo na sonna and 5 padangalla first na paathaduna Maunaragam was it. Mani saroda Maunaragam. And then after that, I think what I would have watched Children of Heaven, because Children of Heaven was in college. Na Singapore la na undergraduation padikumbodhu we watched a lot of world cinema, and it was very theoretical course. Practical nariya kadiyadu, and we used to watch all these films and write reviews about them, right? Practice analyzing them and all of that. That was part of the process. So that was the second film I would have watched. Then adukapram vandu I came back to India, and I did a documentary on K. Balachandar sir. அப்போது அவரோட நிறைய கேபி சார் படங்கள்லாம் பார்த்துருக்கேன். எதிர்நீச்சல் அதெல்லாம் முன்னாடியே பார்த்துருந்தேன். பட் அரங்கேற்றம் ஸ்பெசிஃபிக்லி ஐ வாட்ச்ட் டியூரிங் த டாக்குமெண்ட்ரி. So that was 2010. And then around 2012 I saw Host. At that time I didn't know too much about the director, and but then I watched The Host, and then very recently, of course, in fact Unforgivable last year vanda kuda I watched it literally like 2 weeks ago on Netflix, I think. So that would be the order of things.
Super. So மௌனராகம் ஃபர்ஸ்ட் டைம் பார்க்கும்போது உங்களுக்கு வந்த இம்ப்ரெஷன் என்ன?
I'm a sucker for emotions. Even ஒரு பெரிய அட்வான்டேஜ் என்னென்னா, நார்மலாக சொல்லுவாங்க நம்ம ஒரு ஃபில்ம் மேக்கர் அப்படின்னா ஒரு படம் நம்ம தியேட்டர்லேயோ இல்லை டிவிலேயோ பார்க்கும்போது the impact that it has on you ஒரு ஆடியன்ஸாக பார்க்க முடியாது. once you're a filmmaker you tend to analyze அப்படின்னு. Touch would have been very lucky, because when I watch a film for the first time I watch it like an audience. எனக்கு மைண்டு வந்து இது ஷார்ட் என்ன, இது பர்ஃபார்மன்ஸ் என்ன, இப்படிலாம் போகாது. இட் இஸ் தட் ஸ்டோரி டெல்லிங். அது வந்து எந்த படம் நான் பார்த்தாலும், ஈவன் இஃப் இட் இஸ் அ மாசி ஃபில்ம், கமர்ஷியல் ஃபில்ம், சீனில் வந்து இமோஷன் இருந்துச்சுன்னா அழுவேன் உட்காந்து தேட்டரில். ஸோ ஐ ஆல்வேஸ் வாட்ச் இட் ஃபார் த ஃபர்ஸ்ட் டைம் ஆஸ் அன் ஆடியன்ஸ். அதுக்கப்புறம் தான் இஃப் ஐ வாட்ச் இட் அகேன் ஆர் இஃப் ஐ வாண்ட் டு ரீவாட்ச் இட் அண்ட் லேர்ன் சம்திங் ஃப்ரம் இட், தென் தட் analysis process comes. இது வந்து அடுத்த தடவை தான் வரும். அந்த ஃபர்ஸ்ட் டைம் ஐ எம் அ பியூர் ஆடியன்ஸ். ஸோ அந்த வகையில் நான் பார்க்கும்போது there was something so beautiful and that relationship between the husband and wife and the character of Revati ma'am in that film, where she is so independent and she's so stubborn, and the stubbornness ko arrogance ko there's a very thin line, and that would have been so beautifully captured by Mani sir. And Mohan's characterization, you know, there's nobody's wrong in this. You know, the perspective in that is from where I took it is there is ஒரு character kume there is a logic behind it, there is a reasoning behind it, and more than anything those nuances of emotions, no, for me that really affected me, impacted me, I think is the right word. And so when I watched it, for me it is like, you know, just the beauty of it, and for me the magic of cinema will always be about how you can show characters on screen and then impact your audience. காசு கொடுத்து தேட்டர்லேயோ இல்லை டிவிலேயோ படம் பார்க்குற ஒரு ஆடியன்ஸ் கிட்ட how you can make them connect with your characters that you've written. For me, that is magic. And so for me, I started believing in that magic, you know, when I started watching films. And Maunaragam was a huge, and I still believe in that magic today. When I'm shooting a scene, and the scene la vandu you know, if there is an emotion that has captured well and if the actors have really performed well, I'm not just looking at it as, you know, this is the technical aspect of it, this is the thing. When that magic comes alive on screen, and as அது ஒரு 10 தடவை படித்து அதை ஒரு 20 டைம்ஸ் எழுதி இது பண்ண என்னையே இவ்வளோ இம்பேக்ட் பண்ணுதுன்னா ஃபஸ்ட் டைமாக ஆடியன்ஸ் பார்க்குறவங்களுக்கு எப்படி இம்பேக்ட் பண்ணும், have got it right, or the actors have got it right, or the cinematographer has got it right அப்படின்னு வரும்போது that magic comes alive for me. And for me, that is what I love doing about filmmaking. So for me, I started believing in that magic, that an audience can connect to a character on screen. For me, that is what filmmaking is.
Beautiful. So Mank படம் இருக்கு இல்லையா, டேவிட் ஃபின்ச்சர், அதில் எம்ஜிஎம்மோட ஹெட் வந்து மேயர் அந்த கேரக்டர் சொல்லுவார், சினிமா இஸ் ப்ராபபிளி தி ஓன்லி பிஸ்னஸ் வேர் த கஸ்டமர் அவன் காசு கொடுத்தா அவனுக்கு எதுவுமே கிடைக்க போகிறதில்ல. நம்ம வேற ஏதோ ஒரு பொருளோ இல்லை எதுக்கோ காசு கொடுத்தா நமக்கு ஒரு பொருளோ கிடைக்கும். பட் சினிமாவில் ஆல் யூ கிவ் தம் இஸ் அ ஃபீலிங். ஸோ நீங்கள் சொல்கிறது வந்து எனக்கு எக்ஸாக்ட்லி அதுதான் ஞாபகப்படுத்துது.
And it's true, you know, because ஒரு ஆடியன்ஸ் மெம்பர் வந்து தியேட்ரிக்கல்லையோ இல்லை ஈவன் when they are watching in the personal device today, right? அஃப்கோர்ஸ் இப்போ வர அந்த இதில் வந்து நிறைய டிஸ்ட்ராக்ஷன்ஸ் வந்துடுது, ஒரு வாட்ஸ்அப் மெசேஜ் வருது. ஸோ your personal device has not become a, you know, a very undisturbed experience anymore. But தியேட்டரில் போய் உட்காந்து ஒரு படம் பார்க்கும்போது you forget your life. You forget what's happening outside that movie theater. It is all about, if you're a popcorn lover, then it's all about that popcorn and it's about those characters on screen. And I think that is something, like I said, you know, that is something that you can, the power to do that, the power to influence someone's emotion is nothing but magic for me.
ஸோ இப்போ நீங்கள் சொன்னீங்க இல்லையா, மௌனராகம் எதுக்கு உங்களுக்கு கனெக்ட் ஆச்சுன்னா அந்த ரைட்டிங் தட் யூ ஃபெல்ட் ஃபார் த கப்பல்னு சொல்லி. இஸ் தட் ஹவ் யூ ரைட் லைக் ஒரு எமோஷன் எடுத்துக்கிட்டு அந்த எமோஷன் சுற்றி எழுதுறதோ இல்லை எவ்ரி சீனில் அந்த எமோஷன் கம்யூனிகேட் ஆகிற மாதிரி, இஸ் தட் ஹவ் யுவர் ரைட்டிங் ப்ராசஸ் ஆல்சோ ஒர்க்ஸ்?
So I have to admit one thing, writing is the least favorite process of filmmaking for me. I don't enjoy writing at all. Though I do believe that எந்த கதையாக இருந்தாலும் என்னோட படங்களில் first draft has to come from me. அப்போ தான் எனக்கு அந்த இன்வெஸ்ட்மெண்ட் வரும்னு. So when that draft comes from me, the first flow of writing that I do is, you know, it was funny because when I did the documentary on KB sir, அப்போ அவர் சொன்னது வந்து, மதுமிதா 2 வகையான ஃபில்ம் மேக்கிங் இருக்குது. ஒரு ரைட்டர் வந்து ஃபஸ்ட்டு கேரக்டர்லேருந்து எழுத ஆரம்பிப்பாங்க, ஒரு ரைட்டர் வந்து கதையிலேருந்து எழுத ஆரம்பிப்பாங்க. அண்ட் ஸோ தீஸ் ஆர் த 2 ஸ்டைல்ஸ் ஆஃப் ரைட்டிங் அப்படிங்கிறது அவரோட ஒப்பீனியன். அப்போது அந்த மாதிரி சொல்லும்போது ஐ யூஸ் டு ஆஸ்க் ஹிம், உங்கள் ஸ்டைல் என்ன சார் அப்படின்னு கேட்கும்போது, ஹி ஆல்வேஸ் செட் ஹி வென்ட் ஃபார் கேரக்டர்ஸ் ஃபர்ஸ்ட். அண்ட் subconsciously, even before that, I realized that maybe it was an influence of all the cinema I had seen from different filmmakers, but I always write characters first. Character-oda ஒரு character-ஐயும் develop பண்ணி நம்ம எழுதினதுக்கு அப்புறம் then the story comes for me. Then plot points come. Then for me, which is why if you see even in KD, it is a character driven drama, it is not a plot driven drama. there will be very minimal plot points in the story, but you are invested in that character enough that if that character is sitting and watching paint dry, you will be invested in watching them watch paint dry. So and the building of that investment with the character is primary importance for me. So when I write that character, or any characters for that matter, the idea is to make sure that how relatable are they to an audience. When I say relatable, if we suppose fantasy on எழுதுறோம்னு வெச்சுக்கோங்களேன், அந்த fantasyல கூட, even if you're writing which I am, by the way, I'm writing a monster film next. It's an out-and-out monster film, and it's an international production. So we're making it in Hindi, but then it will go out to an international audience. It's an international producer and everything. The story is set in India. But the monster film, if you see, even the monster, for me, there's got to be something the audience can relate to the monster.
Wow, okay.
Something about it. So what is that human element in the monster? அப்போ ஒரு monster ஒரு fictionalா ஒரு fantasy characterக்கே அது நம்ம யோசிக்கிறோம்னா, படத்துல வர அந்த characters வந்து கண்டிப்பா there's got to be something relatable. There's got to be something. அது வந்து you can love or hate my characters, and that's perfectly fine. But you cannot be indifferent to my characters. And I cannot allow you to be indifferent to my characters. இவனுக்கு என்ன நடந்தாலும் எனக்கு பிரச்சனை இல்லைன்னு ஒரு ஆடியன்ஸ் தியேட்டர் விட்டு வாக் பண்ணி போனாங்கன்னா, then I feel as a filmmaker I failed. You can hate him. I mean, what he does, in horror films, and horror is one genre that I will never do. I have a thing against horror, like personal preference.
Why is that? Is it because of the jump scares, or because நான் என்ன கேட்குறேன்னா, சூப்பர், இது கொஞ்சம் ஆஃப் த டாபிக் தான், பட் ஸ்டில் ஐ வாண்ட் டு அண்டர்ஸ்டாண்ட் யுவர் தாட் ப்ராசஸ். கோரோ இல்லை வயலன்ஸோ நம்ம வாழ்க்கையில் நடக்கிறதுக்கு the probability is higher than we coming across a supernatural entity, இல்லையா?
I don't know about that. I've had some supernatural experiences.
Okay.
So, for somebody who's as logical and as rational as me, I'm not sure if it was real or if it really happened or what of that. So because I think it happened to me, I'm not comfortable watching horror films. See, when somebody is, or horror padathula vandu, if somebody is walking into a room and there's something danger over there, an audience says, they don't go inside there, or anga pogada, there's something wrong there, arivu kittathama yen pora appdin thitra and oru vishayam irukilla. I think that's the success of a filmmaker. And that is the magic with which you can influence a audience member, and that connect that you bring between your characters and your audience is of utmost importance to me.
மான்ஸ்டர்னு சொன்னீங்க இல்லையா, மான்ஸ்டருக்கு எப்படி நீங்கள் எழுதுகிற ஒரு படத்தில் கூட அந்த மான்ஸ்டர் கூட கனெக்ட் வச்சுக்க உங்களுக்கு ஹோஸ்டில் அகெயின் இஸ் தட் வாட் that made you love that film? Because although it's a monster film, it's a very emotional film. Or appa or pon, but it's not melodramatic. Correct. So is that what attracted you to the film?
I think what attracted me to the film is the fact that you remove the monster from the film, it's still a perfectly good film. The hostla irukra or periya idu enna, there are so many layers that he's talking about as a director. For example, he's talking about a dysfunctional family. He's talking about the class system in Korea. He's talking about the single parent subject. He's talking about a lot of layers within that, right? And I think if you remove the monster from the film, it still makes for a good film. It still makes for a good story. I think that is what is fascinating for me. It's a very different kind of film from, let's say, an Arangetram, or from a Maunaragam, or from Children of Heaven, or any of the other films that I've told you. Because I think what I realize also, like the other four that I've spoken about are all very real life dramas. Whereas Host is the only one. It's still a family drama, but I think the monster element adds a layer. And for me, I think I find that very fascinating, because I think as a filmmaker, you're making a film for an audience. You're making it to the best of your satisfaction. But nevertheless, it is for an audience to watch. I don't agree with the thought process that, a filmmaker saying that, நான் எனக்காக தான் படம் பண்ணுறேன், அதுக்கப்புறம் படம் ஓடிச்சுனாலும் படம் ஓடுது ஓடலைங்கிறது நம்ம கையில் இல்லை, பட் ஆடியன்ஸ்க்கு பிடிக்கலங்கிறது இஸ் நாட் மை கன்சர்ன் அப்படின்னு சொல்கிற அந்த தாட் ப்ராசஸில் I don't agree with it. Because for me, at the end of the day, if we were making the film for ourselves, then நம்ம மட்டும் home theater la போட்டு பார்த்துட்டு வீட்ல உட்கார்ந்து இருக்கலாம். That's not the idea. The idea is to make it for an audience. And so I think what really I loved about Host is the fact that you can understand the world of Korea there, in the sense how this class system, how the economic status of someone, how a dysfunctional family, how a single parent, all of these things under society it gives you an insight into that world. And an external factor like a monster, if it comes through, then it kind of creates a little bit of a, you know, surprise element while still keeping you hooked to the show. So for those of the audience that want to see it as a thriller, ஐயோ அந்த மான்ஸ்டர் என்ன பண்ண போகுது அந்த பொண்ணு, are they going to be able to save that child, அப்படிங்கிற அந்த த்ரில்லர் ஆங்கிள்லேருந்து பார்க்குற ஆடியன்ஸ் will watch it on that layer. And then you'll have an audience that will dissect it and see the layers inside of it. So as a filmmaker, you're putting all these layers, and it is like, you know, the excitement of unwrapping a gift. You have layers and layers, and every time you watch it, you unravel something new about it. And for me, that's what was great about The Host.
ஸோ நீங்கள் ரைட்டிங்கில் லேயர்ஸ் பிளான் பண்ணுவீங்களா?
அதாவது ஒரு இன்டென்ஷனலாக வந்து பண்ண மாட்டோம், லைக் ஃபோர்ஸ்ஃபுல்லாக இருக்கக்கூடாது at the end of the day. But then a lot of the times, you know, that's funny because a lot of the times when you write layers, you add layers to your character because, you know, you don't want them to be unidimensional.
One dimension.
And so you add layers to them, you make them gray, or you write a characteristic to them that means something else. 90% of the time, you know, people say இது ஆடியன்ஸ்க்கு வந்து புரியுமானே தெரியல, ஒரு ஆடியன்ஸ் வந்து இதை ரிலேட் பண்ணுவாங்களான்னே தெரில அப்படின்னு சொல்லும்போது I think you need to have that confidence in your audience that they will find it. And it's exciting. It's like a treasure hunt, right, for a filmmaker when you know, when somebody finds what you've hidden, and you trusted that the audience is smart enough and that they will find. And our audience is very intelligent, Ram. Our audience is very intelligent. Sometimes we don't give them enough credit for it. And அவங்க அதை டிஸ்கவர் பண்ணி யாரோ ஒருத்தர் மென்ஷன் பண்ணும்போது the happiness that you get, the satisfaction that you get is just mind-blowing. So I try to write it without it being a force fit.
Let's talk about Arangetram now.
Sure.
Because easily the oldest film.
Yeah.
And இந்த எபிசோடுக்காக தான் நான் அந்த மூவி பார்த்தேன்.
Okay.
Although I'm glad I watched it, it was a tough watch because it was a product of its time.
Yeah.
So நீங்கள் first time பார்க்கும்போது what was your experience like?
So when I was doing KB Sir pathina documentary, when I was doing, I think I watched pretty much all of his films. ஏற்கனவே சில படங்கள் நான் பார்த்திருந்தேன், but சில படங்கள் I had not watched it, and Arangetram was one of those films that I hadn't seen before. But when we were doing the documentary, the idea was not to ask sir நீங்க ரஜினி sir introduce பண்ணிருக்கீங்க, நீங்க கமல் sir introduce பண்ணிருக்கீங்க. That was not the point. Our documentary was very insightful. Our documentary was very in-depth. We asked him questions. I remember still very clearly after watching Arangetram. One of the things that I asked him was, sir, Arangetramla ஒரே சீனில் பிரமிளா மேம் அவங்க அம்மா வந்து சாப்பாடு இருக்காது, கிச்சனில் இருப்பாங்க, அண்ட் எல்லாரும் தட்டு போட்டு வெளியே உட்காந்துருப்பாங்க. Now, how do you come and tell a family of 6 or 7, I don't remember the number of people, but how do you come and tell them that there's no food, right? And she's pregnant. Pramila's mother's character is pregnant inside. I think that scene and the food serving scene and the scene where Pramila ma'am's character talks to her mother about how and why she got pregnant, and the mother feeling guilty and feeling embarrassed is the two most important scenes of the film, if you ask me. And I think the reason why, and we asked KB sir this question when we were shooting the documentary, was, see, you have different actors in that scene, actors of different calibers, actors of different experience, actors of different style of acting. How does a director communicate to each of them differently? Now, when a director goes and tells an actor, idha scene, idha performance, again, it comes from two different schools of thoughts, right? Or KB sir, when I spoke to Kamal sir, when I spoke to Rajini sir, when I spoke to everybody, they said he would act and show. Okay. That ipdida in the scene nadikino appadinu. But that varied between actors. Kamal sir used to tell me that if it was Kamal sir, he would not act and show. If it is Nagesh sir, he would not act and show. Neenga pandradha pannungan vitruvaram. Whereas for the others, he would act and show. He would give them an opportunity to do their thing. But avanga seriya pannala illa avanga ivar edirpaatha alavukku pannala appadina odane avar poi nadichu kaamiparam. Now for me as a filmmaker, I'm very different. I don't act and show my actors. Okay. I believe that it has to come from within them. Of course, I will work with them and I will improvise what I want. This is not what I want. This is what I want. I'll have conversations. We will fine-tune things. I will ask them for another take. I will tell them what I want. All that I can clearly express. But na nadichu kaamikka maaten. Because enna portha varaikum, I mean, again, there's no right or wrong in this, but na nadichu kaamichitena, then they will only try to replicate me.
Mimic you.
Yeah, mimic me. And that's not what I want. I want it to come from within them. I want it to be a performance that is their honest truth, you know. So similarly, so in Arangetram, I think that scene was really important from that perspective. And that's what I learned from it. ஒரு சீனில் வேரியஸ் கேலிபர் ஆஃப் ஆக்டர்ஸ் இருப்பாங்க, வேரியஸ் ஏஜ் குரூப் இருப்பாங்க, வேரியஸ் மெத்தட் ஆக்டர்ஸ் இருப்பாங்க. அவங்க எல்லார்கிட்டையும் how do you get the performance equally? How do you focus on a scene? And I think that is what really I learned from that process. But after having spoken to KB sir about his process. But as a film, when I watched, for me, what was really hard hitting was the fact of how much of a statement it made about the society at that point.
Yeah.
And I don't think, we've even managed to, like scratch the surface today. We're talking about so many things that are, going on in the society, but anniki avlo dheiriyama or prostitute is the a sex worker is the breadwinner of the family, and to have the implications of what she goes through so boldly told on screen, I think it takes a different level of guts. And it takes a different perspective to make her the protagonist of the story, And so I think that's what Arangetram was for me, to be able to make a statement on society. Whether I will make such kind of films, I don't know. That's KB sir. And we should leave legends to their work. But there was so much to learn from that film. Just like I said, அந்த அம்மா கூட பேசுகிற அந்த scene where she's having a chat with her mother, and there's that embarrassment of அடுத்த வேளைக்கு சாப்பாடுக்கு இல்லைங்கும் போது how dare you get pregnant? Isn't there
multiple levels like it is disturbing.
Exactly. And you don't know where the next morsel of food is coming, but then you're okay to do this. And it talks about pregnancy, it talks about women's bodies. I mean, I think in today's context, it's such an important conversation to have. A country that's supposed to be all about, I don't want to make this political at all, but, a country that is all about freedom and women's rights and, freedom of expression has just overturned Roe versus Wade. And the fact that a woman's body is not her decision anymore, And to think of that, imagine in so many years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and to talk about how a daughter was saying that it was wrong of you to get pregnant, or that how could you think of this, and then how helpless that mother character is. I think it made you think, and a film has got to make you think. A film has got to make you question where we are in life. It doesn't have to make big political statements. I'll give you a small example. When I made Vallamai Tharayo, so the climax of the film is shot in an orphanage. Okay. And the orphanage, there are a lot of differently abled children. And what was great about it for me was that it puts life in perspective for you. What you're fighting for and what they are living, it really puts life in perspective. And when the film was over, and the orphanage la irundha kolandengala, we took them to a movie theater for the first time. They had never stepped out of that orphanage, about 500 children. We took them to the local cinema theater, and pada release aanapodu we took them and we showed them the film. So they got to see themselves on screen. They got to see their names on screen and all of that. So they were whistling and clapping and they were very excited. Made me very happy to see them like that. But also, when they came out, there were 2 girls I remember, and I think I've mentioned this in a number of interviews because it impacted my life so much. 2 of them, they came out and they were both about 17, 18, and both of them were polio affected. And so they said, ma'am, ungakitta pesalama, kandipa solunga enna vishayam. One of them is still in touch with me today. It's been 13 years since I made Valamai Tharayo. No, actually 15. And she still writes handwritten letters to me, and we're still in touch, you know. She's working in a company here in Chennai. But I'm saying, like, she came up to me, she was 16, 17 at that point, and she came up to me and she said, ma'am, எப்போவுமே எங்களுக்கு என்ன ஃபீலிங் இருந்திருக்குன்னா, கடவுள் எங்களை இப்படி படைச்சாரு அப்படிங்கிறதுனால வந்து எங்கள் ஃபேமிலி, எங்கள் அப்பா அம்மா, எங்கள் ரிலேட்டிவ்ஸ் எல்லாருமே வந்து எங்களை வேணாம், நாங்கள் we are a burden அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு ஃபீலிங் தான் எங்களுக்கு ஆல்வேஸ் இருந்திருக்கு. பட் உங்கள் படத்தில் பார்த்ததுக்கப்புறம் கை கால் உடம்பு எல்லாம் சரியாக இருக்கிற ஒரு பொண்ணு எங்களை பார்த்து சந்தோஷமாக இருக்கணும்னு கற்றுக்குறாங்கிற மாதிரி நீங்கள் வச்சுருந்தீங்க. அப்போ எங்கள் லைஃப்லேயும் ஏதோ ஒரு பர்பஸ் இருக்குங்கிற ஃபீலிங் வந்து எங்களுக்கு கொடுத்துச்சு மேம். தேங்க்யூ ஃபார் தேட். வி ஆர் நாட் அ பர்டன், வி கேன் ஆல்சோ பி அன் இன்ஸ்பிரேஷன் ஃபார் சம் ஒன்ங்கிற இது கொடுத்தீங்க. ஐ நெவர் தாட் ஆஃப் இட் லைக் தேட். I mean, the intention when I made it was that, you know, it's very easy to be happy. Learn to be happy. அப்படிங்கிறது தான் I was trying to
understand your own privilege.
Yeah, and you know, realize what you have. And you know, if on the physically challenged or disabilities இருக்கிற differently abled குழந்தைங்க வந்து, if they can be happy, why can't I be happy? It's a very, very, you know,
simple question.
Simple question and an existential question, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, அந்த scene வந்து முன்னாடியே எழுதிருந்தது வேற மாதிரி எழுதிருந்தது. Then when I went to the location, the question became very simple, and you know, the scene became very simple for me. And I changed it and I wrote it, and I was glad it had that impact. And I had tears in my eyes, and you know, for me, them feeling that they had a purpose in their life, you know, because of something we can do on screen. And for me, that was the realization that hit me, that you can make a difference, even if it is ortharoda life la na kuda, you can make that difference with what you're creating on screen. Similarly, I had an incident with KD when somebody on Twitter messaged me and said, ma'am, என்னோட தாத்தா பாட்டியோட I have not spoken in many years because அப்பா அம்மாக்கும் தாத்தா பாட்டிக்கும் சண்டை ரொம்ப வருஷமா, அதனால நான் அவங்க கிட்ட பேசுறதே இல்லை. பட் உங்கள் படம் பார்த்ததுக்கப்புறம், கேடியை பார்த்ததுக்கப்புறம் தாத்தா ஞாபகம் வந்துச்சு. ஸோ I just reached out to them. I went and spent a day with them, and they were very happy. And I saw how much happiness it brought to them and to me. So now I'm trying to make sure that my அப்பா அம்மா and பாட்டி தாத்தாக்குள்ளே இருக்கிற அந்த சண்டையை வந்து சால்வ் பண்ணி அவங்கள ஒன்று சேர்க்கணும்னு நான் ட்ரை பண்ணுறேன். Thank you for giving me that one day with my grandfather. You know, I'm sure, you know, there are larger things like, you know, box office and how much money a film made, and, you know, did it win awards and all of that. I think those are also important, right? I don't disagree with that. But then when somebody messages you like this, where it's a real person that you have impacted, அந்த ஒருத்தர் ஓட மனசில் அந்த ஒரு சின்ன மாற்றம் வந்துச்சுல, தட் என்னோட தாத்தா கிட்ட நான் போய் பேசணும், என்னோட தாத்தா வந்து ஞாபகம், you know, I need to spend a little more time with him. I messaged Sivakarthikeyan sir. I was in Goa, and I watched Dawn. I was shooting in Goa, and Dawn released, and I watched it in a theater there. And when I watched it, you know, the scene with his father, it was such an impactful scene. And as I messaged him and I said, and I cried because I'm very close to my father. And you know, just something, you know, connected, and it had an emotional impact in me. Appo I messaged him and I said, you know, great that you did this. And more importantly, இங்கேருந்து தேட்டரை விட்டு வெளியே போகும்போது I noticed somebody call their father and say, சாப்பிட்டீங்களா, நல்லா இருக்கீங்களா, I think that is the power of cinema. That is the power, that is the magic of cinema. Even if it is that one person in all the millions of people that you can create that change in, or that light moment, அந்த ஒரு ஃபோன் கால், அந்த ஒரு அப்பாவுக்கு அன்னைக்கு சந்தோஷம் வந்திருக்கும்ல, என் பையன் திடீர்னு ஃபோன் பண்ணி சாப்பிட்டியான்னு கேட்டான் அப்படிங்கிற அந்த ஒரு சந்தோஷம், அது நம்மளால கொடுக்க முடிஞ்சதுல. I think that is the success.
இவ்வளோ சொன்னதுக்கப்புறம் நான் இப்போ அடுத்த படத்துக்கு பற்றி போனால் இந்த கான்வர்சேஷன் டைல்யூட் பண்ண மாதிரி இருக்கும்னு எனக்கு தோணுது. பிகாஸ் அவ்வளோ சூப்பராக போயிட்டுருக்கு. பட் ஸ்டில் பார்வா சினிமா பற்றி பேசிகிட்டு இருக்கோம். அண்ட் வை எமோஷன் ஹவு ஃபில்ம் கேன் மேக் யூ ஃபீல் அதை பற்றி பேசும்போது அன்பிலீவபிள். இட்ஸ் அ வெரி சேட் ஃபில்ம்.
Yeah, it is.
What was your state of mind like?
I wouldn't say it's one of my all-time favorites or anything of that sort. The reason why I put it is in nama filmmakers are irukumbodhu we watch so many, you watch so much content. You watch so much content. Appo 4 will always be your all-time favorites, and then you have one that you've just watched that had an impact on you. Okay. I was just sitting last week or 2 weeks ago at home. I was down with COVID. And COVID time, the great thing is you can watch so much content. You can catch up on so much content. Especially na Goa la shoot mudichittu vandadukku appuram I didn't have time to watch any content at all. So this was great time to just catch up on content. I'm a huge fan of Sandra Bullock, right from her Miss Congeniality days, like even before that. I just love her performances. I love her kind of films that she does. So when I saw Sandra Bullock, I wanted to watch it. I think for me, the reason why it stayed, and maybe people can differ, whether it's a good film or a bad film is a very subjective thing. அதனால தான் நான் படம் பார்க்கும்போது யாராவது என்கிட்ட படம் நல்ல படமா இல்லை மோசமான படமான்னு கேட்கும்போது நான் ஆல்வேஸ் மை ரெஸ்பான்ஸ் இஸ் எனக்கு பிடிச்சிருந்தது, எனக்கு பிடிக்கல. That's all I say. I never say it's a good film, it's a bad film. Because, somebody's liking is very subjective. So Unforgivable பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் I think what I really liked about it is the fact that scene when she breaks down and you realize that she did not, the twist. I don't want to give away. But for those that have not seen, but that moment when she breaks down to
Viola Davis.
Yes. And the lawyer, I think it's such a powerful moment. And just in terms of how you perceive somebody throughout the film, you think she's guilty, and every action of hers, like the police officer who comes, you can put spoiler alert, but just the police officer who comes and the way he says, you are a convict. The earlier you admit it, you killed a cop. So the earlier you admit it, the better. And she's paid her price for it. She spent 20 years in prison for it. And as an audience, you look at her through that perspective. Of course, with her performance, you feel sorry for her, you feel her struggle, you feel all of that. But then you are made to believe a perception about someone. And then, in honest truth of it, you realize that that's not the truth. And your perspective about that person changes. And I think that was the most powerful thing about the film. The realization for me that even in real life, ஒருத்தரை பற்றி நம்ம ஒரு இம்ப்ரெஷன் ஃபார்ம் பண்ணிட்டோம்னா that impression does not, யாரோ சொன்னாங்க, somebody told you something about someone, or whatever the case may be, you form an opinion about that person and you judge that person. And that's something I always try to avoid doing. Like no matter who I hear about, who I talk to, I try not to be judgmental about them. And I do my best to look at it from maybe, what they went through, maybe why they did what they did. There's a reason behind it. And we don't understand it. I try to be very non-judgmental of friends, of family, of all of that. Similarly, for me, it was that. In Unbelievable, it was about that one character, how the entire world feels like she's against. She's fighting a battle alone, and then everybody is perceiving her based on that one incident,
what they think is truth.
They think is the truth. And then when you realize it's not, does it change? Do you feel bad for looking at her like that? Do Do you realize that you were wrong in, the perception? And I mean, I know I've not mentioned it as one of my favorite films, but this is something that I also observed in another film called Jana Gana Mana, which I recently
Very
watched.
recent, Prithviraj.
Prithviraj's film.
Same, Truth, what you think
Is not, and I think it was amazing in that one shot. There's a shot in a car where the police officer is taking these 4 people,
Convicts,
and going to perform an encounter, right?
Yeah.
In that scene, if you see, முதல் தடவை அவங்க அந்த சீனை காமிக்கும் போது there is the laughter of these convicts.
Louder இருக்கும். Yeah.
It's not just louder. It is mixed in such a way. It is built in such a way that it creates a sense of, it creates like goats being taken to a slaughter.
Oh.
In my mind at least, the way and the way I felt when I watched the scene was basically that, ayo idiots, they don't even know what's going to happen to them. And I had zero sympathy for them.
Yeah.
Because that's what the creator wanted you to feel, right? Like they were wrong and they had committed a crime, especially when it's a crime as like, raping, supposedly, allegedly raping and burning a girl. And, when they travel, that shot from the Jeep where, you've got one of fantastic actor and he's sitting in the front and you're thinking they deserve what's coming to them. They're going to go for an encounter. He's going to do an encounter. And that, you have a feeling that they deserve what they're getting. Now cut to a few scenes later where the truth.
The same scene plays out again.
Yeah. Now this time, it's the exact same laughter. It's the exact same thing. But then, now that you know the truth, and now that the score is slightly different between the previous scene, the background score and this, and the scene, and there's a couple of extra shots of the police officers' reactions than you had seen before, and then suddenly you feel sorry for them. Imagine what kind of power a filmmaker has, no? To show the same scene once before and make you feel, like they deserve
completely
it.
Different emotion. Yeah.
And then a few scenes later to make you feel like, oh my God, I feel bad that they're going to die or that, they don't deserve what's coming. And I think, like I said, I keep going back to that. I think that is what, for me, unbelievable was, and why I put it on a list of film is because the perception, you have the power to create that perception about a character, about how you make an audience feel. I think it's one of the greatest powers that you have, to influence someone's emotion and to make them relate, to make them happy. வெளியே வைஃபோட சண்டை போட்டு வர்றவங்களோ இல்லை ஆஃபீஸ்லேருந்து ரொம்ப ஸ்ட்ரெஸ்டாக வந்தாலோ அந்த தியேட்டரில் போய் உட்காந்தா ஒரு ஹாப்பினஸ் கிடைக்குது இல்லை, you being able to give somebody that happiness, I think that's just amazing.
Super. Like, to add on to what you just said, I just remembered the scene in Jana Gana Mana where Suraj's son is admitted in hospital, and the mother of the dead professor, she comes and she consoles him and tells, the first time this scene plays out, she tells, for all that you have done, God will give you what you deserve. So you feel that she's praising him, blessing his son. Yeah. But the second time that scene plays out, you see how guilt-ridden this man is and how scared. That was my favorite moment.
Yeah. And just to change that perspective, right? It's the same dialogue. She's not said anything different. Yeah. Maybe the shot was slightly different. You get to see Suraj's for a little bit. Yeah. But then it's the same scene. Yeah. It was shot at the same time. It was, made in the same perspective. But then to show you the other side of it. I think it's just...
So do you place yourself in the shoes of the characters while you write?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I think it has a lot, if every time I place myself in the shoes of the character, then I think it will be quite unidimensional. நான் அந்த சிச்சுவேஷனுக்கு எப்படி ரியாக்ட் பண்ணுவேங்கிறத பொறுத்து தான் then my characters will react. So I don't, it depends on the scene, it depends on the character. But what I do a lot of, and it's not creepy at all, I sit and watch people a lot. I sit in coffee shops. I sit in Chennai. That's one of the things that I miss the most after I've moved to Bombay, is sitting in the beach and just watching people go by. I think it's such an amazing insight when you watch people, you know, just nightla walking porangala, Besanagar beach la walking porangala, early morning when I go for my run or something, you see people walking. Every person has a story. The way they walk, the way they talk, the way they stop for that argambul juice, the way they buy their vegetables in the morning, there is a story behind each one of them. வண்டியிலேருந்து கார்லேருந்து இறங்கும்போது இல்லை பைக்லேருந்து இறங்கும்போது யார் ஃபஸ்ட்டு இறங்குறாங்க, உடனே பைக்கு நிறுத்திட்டு வந்துடுறாங்களா, இல்லை டு தே லிங்கர் நியர் த பைக், டு தே வாக் அப் டு த, டு தே பார்கெயின் வித் த வெண்டர், காய்கறி அவங்களோட வெண்டரோட பார்கெயின் பண்ணுறாங்களா. ஆல் ஆஃப் தீஸ் ஆர் இன்சைட்ஸ் இன் டு பீப்புள்ஸ் ஸ்டோரிஸ். அண்ட் ஐ திங்க் that observation gives me a lot of material for my film. When I write. I think it gives me a lot of insight into how people can react. So I take inspiration from people I meet, people I talk to, people that, you know, have influenced me, some other characters that I've read about. I take inspiration from that to judge என்னோட கேரக்டர் இந்த சிச்சுவேஷனில் எப்படி ரியாக்ட் பண்ணுவாங்க. And of course, it is filmmaking is a very collaborative process, and I always believe that, you know, when somebody says it's and since KD, I have adopted that thing where when I end my film, I always say a film by Madhumita and team. I think it's really important, you know. I'm a very collaborative person. I don't think a director alone can make a film. It has a lot of contribution from each member of the team. அது வந்து ஸ்பாட் பாயாக இருந்தாலும் சரி, இல்லை ப்ரொடக்ஷன் அசிஸ்டண்ட்டாக இருந்தாலும் சரி, இல்லை ஒரு அசிஸ்டன்ட் டைரக்டராக இருந்தாலும் சரி, இல்லை ஆக்டர்ஸாக இருந்தால் கூட ஓகே. ஒரு சீனை நம்ம பெர்ஃபார்ம் பண்ண சொல்லி நம்ம டிஸ்கஸ் பண்ணும்போது some contribution that the actor gives also makes the character. So in that perspective, அது DOP டீமாக இருக்கலாம், இல்லை ஒரு லைட்டிங் சேஞ்சாக இருக்கலாம், it can be anything. So I think that collaborative process, I believe in writing also. So whenever I write the first draft, and then I always bring another writer to collaborate with me, either for screenplay and dialogue or only for dialogue, but then nevertheless they will be part of a discussion. So there's a lot of contribution from them as well. Appo there is a little bit of a fact check. Okay. If, for example, if I'm writing a male character or if I'm writing a child, then I talk to children to know, is this how you'll react? What would you do when you do this? So in crossroads like that, that's what I do. So you know, if it feels organica varla அப்படிங்கிற ஒரு feeling வந்துச்சுன்னா, then I talk to real people and see in the மாதிரி ஒரு situation இருந்துச்சுன்னா, then how do you react to it? What would you do? You know, what would be your first instinct? And a lot of the times, whether I decide to use exactly that or not, you know, ஒருத்தருக்கும் ஒரு experience இருக்கும், you know, so not everybody will react the same way. Out of that, which I feel is my character's organic reaction, I take it and I put it in. But of course, that's not possible for every scene, that's not possible for every emotion. Where I'm at a crossroad, I do this.
So when you're writing, you have the liberty to make choices, bring in your own experiences, like bring in your own observations of people to how they talk, how they react. But when you're remaking or say adapting a different film, okay, how much liberty do you have, or how much of your own personality can you bring into a structure that's already present?
So okay, so I think the question is coming invariably to what I'm doing next. So I've just done, and I know it's going to come as an announcement very soon, but I'm happy to talk about it. There is a cult classic called Angamali Diaries. Yes. And we have adapted it in Hindi. And when I say we have adapted it, it's produced by Abundancia, who have made a lot of films, very good films. And Vikram Malhotra, he's the producer. And we have adapted it, and we have finished shoot in Goa. And that was the film that I was shooting in Goa. And adula vandu Arjun Das is playing the lead. Okay. In Hindi. So avarku modal Hindi padam, enakku modal Hindi padam. I wouldn't say debut or launch, I mean, because I don't believe you can have a debut so many times. But Hindi la, this would be both our first films. Of course, there's a lot of other cast as well and all of that. So before that, I was of the opinion that I would not like to do a remake. I wouldn't organically think of doing a remake. Of course, KD I'm remaking in Hindi, but that's my own film, right? So Tamil la panna KD, Hindi la I'm directing, and we're in the process of casting and all of that. So that is different. But I'm saying இன்னொருத்தரோட படத்தை எடுத்து அதுவும் of all the films, something like Angamali Diaries, which has a huge fan following, and all due respect to Lijo, that's why I don't like to call it as a remake. We have adapted it. I think while the spine of the story is the same, there are lots of changes that we've done to it. It is how I look at the film. Now, in terms of writing, I think what we did also, we watched the film a couple of times. There's a collaborator writer that I'm working with. And then we put Lijo's version aside, and then we wrote our version of it. So story spine will still remain the same, but then the characterization is different. The world is different. The emotions are different. The tone of the film is different. And I think one of the biggest compliments that I can get after people have seen the film is it looks nothing like the original.
Okay.
And that's what we aspire to do. Whether it's a good film, it's a bad film, enna pannalum vandu kandipa that comparison is going to come.
That's
because
inevitable.
It's inevitable. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of Lijo. You know, I had a conversation with his writers before we started making it to understand why he made what he made, and all of that. And I spent 3 months in Goa just to do research for this film. Just to understand, and this is not the Goa that you've seen on screen a lot, which is the party and rave party and drinking, and you know, it is not that Goa. It is a very rural Goa. And I wanted to get that world right. I wanted to get that world authentic. The characters believable. So 3 months na poi Goa la vandu, before I signed the film, is this going to be the most authentic version that I can tell this story in as a filmmaker? Is this my interpretation of that story? அப்படிங்கிற அந்த கான்ஃபிடென்ஸ் அண்ட் அந்த ப்ராசஸ் எனக்கு வர்றதுக்கு I went to Goa and I spent 3 months before I signed it. And I said, now I know this world enough. Now I've done enough background about this world for me to set the story here. And this will be my interpretation of the story. And I think in that writing process, after the first couple of times, we stopped watching the original. ஏற்கனவே நான் முன்னாடி of course film festival எல்லாம் பார்த்திருக்கேன், but இப்போ இந்த ப்ராஜெக்ட்டுக்காக we watched it couple of times. And then after that we started, you know, very respectfully, it has its place. And we are not attempting to one up Lijo. We're not trying to do any of that. We are just doing our interpretation of that story. And in that writing process, we went with the world of Goa. We went with the, you know, things that are organically in that world. The characters that would be believable in that world. And so that took us on its own ride. So upon the characterization or writing process, or illa character oda journey, or illa the tone and treatment of the film, it all came together because of where we were setting the story. And staying true and authentic to that. And that's what we've done.
Looking forward to that film.
Thank you.
Finally, we'll close it with The Children of Heaven.
Okay.
So, what was your first impression when you watched this film? Had you heard of, like, did you, like,
No, I did not know of the director. I did not know of, you know, Majid Majidi, and I had not seen any of his films. It was one of my first, I remember it was one of my first films that we watched in World Cinema class in my college. And we had to write analytical, I think 2,000 word essay about the film and why, what kind of statements was it trying to make? What did we like about it? Not like a review, but more like a analysis of the film, and all of that. And for me, I think those kids in the film and their shoe will remain etched in my heart forever. And the reason for that is that angst. It's just a shoe. I mean, like from a world that you come in, where you திடீர்னு நாளைக்கு ஒரு event இருக்குன்னா உடனே you go and you buy a pair of shoes. Like that is the privilege with which you're blessed with.
Absolutely.
And to remind you, and when you're in college, to be honest, I was in college in 2004. Today, as much as privilege is a conversation, I don't think in 2000s we even knew that we have to acknowledge our privilege, right? But in my household, Appa always taught us one thing, which was that நீ ரோட்ல போகும்போது திடீர்னு ஒருத்தர் வந்து அங்கே if he's begging பிச்சை எடுத்துட்டு இருக்காரு அப்படின்னா think of yourself how much you're better off than that person and be grateful for what you have. இப்படிங்கிறது எப்போவுமே don't compare yourself with somebody else has got a Mercedes Benz, I have only a I-20 அப்படிங்கிற அந்த comparison பார்க்காத. See who's worse off than you and then be grateful for what you have. So this was what was taught to us as children. So I think it was checking our privilege, indirectly checking our privilege at one point. But I think Children of Heaven reminded me that there are stories in worlds that you don't know exist. And I mean, just to direct children as actors is such a tough thing to do. It's such a tough thing to do. And அந்த டுடோங் போட்டுட்டு அந்த பொன் குழந்தையோ இல்லை அந்த பையனோ அவங்க அம்மா கேரக்டரோ அவங்க அப்பாவோட கேரக்டரோ you felt a part of that family. And அந்த ரன்னிங் ரேஸில் அந்த பையன் வந்து செகண்ட் ப்ரைஸ் வாங்காமல் ஃபர்ஸ்ட் ப்ரைஸ் வாங்கினோடனே the disappointment that you feel is so real. It's like, shit, I wish I could go and buy this guy a pair of shoes. I wish I could just go and give it to him. And that's not to take away from their struggle. That's not to say, என்னால முடியும் என்கிட்ட காசு இருக்குன்னா. It's not that. But it is like, அவன் மூஞ்சில இருக்கிற அந்த ஒரு disappointment is so real, is so hard hitting. And, funnily enough, for me, I think in my career of 15 years, the biggest compliment I received was someone, people write on Insta and Twitter and everywhere and they praise your film, what they loved about it, they related to it, all of that. But as a filmmaker, one of the biggest praises that I received was when someone wrote to me and said, your film reminded me of Children of Heaven.
Oh, wow, okay.
I think that's the biggest compliment someone could have given me. Because for me, that film means so much. It's what made me decide. Because, when you're in college, there's so many other options, right? You can go into corporate filmmaking. You can go into ad filmmaking. You can go into unscripted. You can go into so many different ways. But to tell stories, I think Children of Heaven is what made me want to tell stories.
Wow.
And that kind of stories, that is my favorite kind of stories. That's what comes to me, naturally. And that's what I get awed by, the simple stories. It's not about what camera you used. It's not about what kind of shots you're able to keep. All that works towards telling that simple story. And that feeling that I had when that kid won the first prize and didn't get the shoes, right? Similarly, KD theaterல release ஆகுது and we are sitting in amongst the audience. Now, because I don't appear for too many interviews and all of that, people don't recognize me, which is great. So I went to the theater with my amma appa and we were sitting and watching. And in KD, on the last scene இருக்குல்ல where he runs away from home. அவருக்கு வந்து அந்த தலைக்கூத்தல் திருப்பி பண்ணுறதுக்காக அவங்க ஃபேமிலியெலாம் ரெடி ஆகுறாங்க அப்படின்னதுக்கப்புறம் அவங்க திருப்பி வந்து பார்த்து அந்த பெட்டு காலியாக இருந்துச்சு.
Oh my God.
You won't believe, I heard such a collective sigh in the theater. Like a relief. I heard a couple of people even go, Pada.
Yeah, he's not
there. He escaped. And it was that same feeling. It was like, you care about my KD so much that you're happy that he ran away, that he's safe. And similarly, it was amazing, Ram. I think it was my most cherished moment in my career of filmmaking is கேடி வள்ளி அந்த சாங் இருக்குல்ல, அந்த சாங்குக்கு வந்து ஒரு அஜித் சார் படத்துக்கோ இல்லை ஒரு விஜய் சார் படத்துக்கோ வந்து விசில் அடித்து கை தட்டி பார்ப்பாங்கல்ல, அந்த மாதிரி they were clapping for an 80-year-old man's romance with a 75-year-old lady that he hasn't seen. And on the scene la pathina, it's not like overtly expressive, it's not like a very enna solradhu massy moment la onnum kadayadu. But there's this one shot where he, you know, just enjoys the rain. He looks up at the sky and he blushes, and Katie blushes and looks out at the rain. They whistled and they clapped. Wow. I mean, that feeling when you realize that your characters have translated to becoming real people for the audience. That அந்த ஸ்க்ரீன்லேருந்து ஆல்மோஸ்ட் இறங்கி வந்து நேர உங்களோட ஆடியன்ஸோடு அவங்க இன்ட்ராக்ட் பண்ணுறாங்க அப்படிங்கிற தட் ஃபீலிங், நோ, I mean, it's just indescribable. It's like you have to, you have to be there, you have to experience it to know what that's like. So for me, Children of Heaven, you know, gave me that feeling that, you know, you can talk to your audience, you can make your audience happy, you can make your audience relate to your characters, you can show them that world. And you know, in those days they used to call it cinema kamikkiradhunu solluvaangala, when they used to do that projector thing, and in fairs and circuses and kovil thiruvilas it used to be there. I think that's what it is eventually today. You're bringing a bunch of people who know nothing about your world, who know nothing about your characters, and you're having them relate to them and make them believe that, you know, this is a world that exists. And I think that's what Children of Heaven did for me. It made me want to make that kind of cinemas. I will make different kind of cinemas because I think as a filmmaker, I want to make films of different genres because that's exciting for me. I want to make an out-and-out action film. I am making a film that's like Knives Out meets Marriage Story. Wow. Okay. I'm making that also. I'm writing that also. So I think I like to explore different genres in filmmaking. But then I think the one standard thing that I would not compromise on is, you know, my characters and their emotions. And I think that is what, if at all I can say that there is something that's consistent with all my films, I think it would be that. It's my characters and their emotions and the audience being able to relate to it.
Thank you very much. I loved having this conversation.
Thank you.
All the best. I hope you go on to create many more characters that people will care about. So thank you very much for this time.
Thank you so much.
We have a little something for you.
Oh, you? Okay.
Yeah. So our designer Naveen, he made something for you.
Thank
so
you.
Can you open?
Of course I can. I'm excited. Oh wow. That is amazing. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So there is Maunaragam, there is Arangetram, there is Unforgivable, there is The Host and Children of Heaven. Please tell him that it's such a beautifully made poster, and it is so well done.
He'll be happy.
I will cherish this a lot.